Welcome to Film at 50, a podcast that celebrates semi-centennials in the world of cinema. I'm your host, Brian Rowe. Very excited to welcome Danny Jarabek to the podcast today to talk about Scarecrow, starring Gene Hackman and Al Pacino. Yes, those two guys were in one movie together. It's not a film that a lot of people might have heard of, but it was a really interesting watch. I enjoyed this last night. How are we doing, Danny?
I'm doing wonderful. It's a huge honor to be here with you today, Brian. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being on Film at 50 for the first time. Thrilled to have you here. Before we get started on our movie today, Danny, I'd love for you to talk about kind of what role has film played in your life, and if you have any favorites you can share with us, that would be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So I really fell in love with film in college. I took a couple classes just on a whim. I wasn't studying film at the time. I'm actually an architect, so that's
Oh,
really
cool.
where that's what my career is in. But film, I really fell in love with it. Just taking a couple classes, had a mentor who was a professor in film in undergrad, and we just became really close. She showed me a lot of Criterion movies. I just kind of fell in love with the medium, and over time, it just became a huge part of my life. Starting film clubs during the pandemic was
Mm-hmm.
something that really connected me with other people, other film lovers. Just finding a community to talk about something we love during a really difficult and isolating time was something that was really special and something that made it a lot easier to get through that time.
Yes.
So yeah, it just continued to grow, and now, of course, it's developed into my own podcast talking about movies, The
Mm-hmm.
Rolling Tape, which has been just an absolute pleasure to run and operate, and have just gotten to connect with so many amazing film lovers through it, and that's been just a really great experience. And I'm grateful to all the things that film has brought into my life.
Yeah, talk about rolling tape. Like what's kind of like your angle on film on your podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. So with the rolling tape, we have a website where we do publications on written work, opinion pieces, reviews, but then we also do our weekly podcast where we actually alternate between two different episodes. We do double
Oh, okay.
features of past movies, so any year, any time, any location, place, whatever, and we try to pair these two movies on some sort of connected theme or idea, and then just examine how these two movies approach that theme in different ways. And then, all conversely, the other weeks we alternate with movies, just reviewing movies in theater. So current releases, and we talk
Okay.
about industry news. We do awards updates, Oscar predictions, Oscar reactions, all of that good stuff.
Yeah, we're recording this in mid-February. By the time this drops, Danny, the Oscars will have happened. So when you're listening to this, we will know who
We
has won
will.
Best Actress, Kate Blanchett or Michelle Yeoh.
It's a big debate around
It will
here. We're
be
still
out
trying to
in the
figure it out.
world. But that's awesome. Did you start your podcast in 2022 like I did, or was it later?
We started it just last year in
Oh, last year.
2022.
Okay.
Yep, just
I was
last
one of the
summer.
ones who was like really losing my mind in the summer of 2020. And I said, I need to start a podcast like
Yes,
everybody else
yeah.
is doing. It was really nice to have a venue in the fall of 2020, spring of 21 to weekly come on here and talk to a bunch of people about movies. I needed that. I don't know about you. Like that was a
No, I
tough few
totally
months, you
get
know?
that. Yeah, with that, we actually, like I said, we had a film club of just a group of friends who we brought in and talked movies during that
Mm.
time. And that eventually kind of like developed and grew. And eventually we were like, we kind of like do this already. Why don't we just formalize it? And and
Yeah.
so yeah, that developed eventually into the rolling tape. And so that was the lineage. We didn't start during the pandemic, but we had the ideas that were circulating and eventually developed into that.
That's awesome. Do you have a few favorite movies of all time? Are you able to choose three or four, or is that a difficult
No, I
situation?
I understand for a lot of people it's a difficult question. That totally makes sense to me, but I actually do have a pretty set four that I
Okay.
hasn't changed in quite some time. So my number one of all time is Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless
Oh,
Mind.
so good. I love that
And
movie.
what's crazy is, yeah, as of recording, obviously, we're recording for the rolling tape talking about that movie tomorrow,
Oh, cool.
two
Okay.
days before Valentine's Day. And so I'm personally not emotionally ready for what that discussion is going to entail, because
Hmm.
that's it's my favorite movie, and I have to be objective, obviously. But yeah, that's going to be tricky. And then a
Yeah.
couple others. My second favorite's always been Her from Spike Jonze.
Okay. Yeah, that there's definitely some similarities, right, between Eternal
Yeah,
Sunshine and
yeah,
Her. I mean, you have
right.
the Spike Jonze, Charlie Kaufman kind of connection.
Hmm. And then kind of blending that like romance and sci-fi angle.
Right. That's interesting. That's kind
Yes.
of like my two favorite films are Sunset Boulevard and Mulholland Drive. And they
Oh,
both have a lot of similarities, right? You can really pair them together. There's so many similarities with themes and obviously with location. So you kind of do
mm.
the same thing with Her and Eternal Sunshine. That's cool.
Yeah. I mean, you have also two incredible movies at the top of your list.
Yeah.
Those are two 5 stars for me. But also a couple others, more recent ones that I have up there are Last Black Man in San Francisco and Portrait of a Lady on Fire
Oh,
are two other favorites.
those are awesome. Neither one got into the Oscars, right? Did Portrait of a Lady get in? No.
Listen, I am still reeling about that. I haven't fully recovered.
What happened? How
No.
did Portrait not get in? Was it like wasn't it released extremely late? Like I want to say critics were
So
reviewing it like as the season was happening.
yeah,
Didn't it come
and
out late?
then also France that didn't submit it for international feature either.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so it didn't pick up momentum in that category. And then like, oh man, I would have given it best cinematography,
Like
let
how did
alone
that
just
not get a
nominated it.
cinematography it should have gotten into?
Oh
Like
my
if they
god,
had
yeah.
released it, if the strategy had been better, I think it could have gotten cinematography.
Yeah, and it was distributed by Neon too,
Mm,
who had a great, like, they also won Best Picture that year. So I mean,
right.
so yeah, they've had a lot of successes. Just one that I wish got a little more attention, but still up there in my favorites. So
Those are great choices. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. I am a lifelong Jim Carrey fan, and it's always really exciting when you have an actor like that you adore who's mainly known for comedy, right? In the 90s, and then seeing him start to stretch as an actor in The Truman Show and Man on the Moon, and
mhm.
then just such stunning work he does in Eternal Sunshine. I think because there was that stigma of him as a comedy actor, that's why he couldn't get into that final five the way that Kate Winslet did able to get in for Best Actress in the early 2005 awards ceremony. Like, do you think Jim Carrey should have been nominated for that?
I think so. Honestly, I think he shows just such a nuance and range to
Mm-hmm.
who he is as a performer in that movie. It's why it's my favorite performance of him. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I love his comedy stuff too,
Right.
and he's fantastic at that. But the range he shows in Truman and Eternal Sunshine, like you said, just shows that he can do dramatic stuff really
Mm-hmm.
well too. And so I think, yeah, I think it's just a phenomenal role.
I hope that he has an Oscar nomination in him. Kidding, he was great in the show on the series on
Yeah.
Showtime, and I'm like, he just needs one like Darren Aronofsky, one of these directors to find like a really rich part for him in the later stage of his career. Like I think it could happen. He just needs that one great director to take a chance on him in a dramatic film.
Right.
So I'm crossing my
Yeah.
fingers.
If he gets that director and the right script with the right level of
Right.
nuance that I think he can achieve, it could happen.
Because
We might
Sonic
see.
Sonic the Hedgehog 2 isn't going to do it.
That one's not going to do it. I mean, maybe it's a great film, but the Academy, I don't know if they go for it.
As a Jim Carrey completist, I watched it a few weeks ago just because it's on Paramount Plus, and it was a rough go. I was like, this is not for me. It's not for me. Anyway, getting to our film today, Scarecrow. Had you heard of this movie before? Like, what was your knowledge of this film from 73?
Yeah, so I had very vaguely heard of this film, just in connection with, probably passing through Al Pacino's filmography at some point. And so I had heard of it, but I really did not know what it was and what it entailed. And so what was really curious about this watch for me was, I had known very vaguely like who was in it
Mhm.
and the title. And so I was like, Scarecrow, is this like a horror movie? Like, what is the
Very
and
strange
so
title for this story.
yeah, yeah. So the title definitely subverted my expectation a little bit going into it, I would say.
Yeah. Like I was vaguely aware of it because I knew that Al Pacino had two films released in 73 that both were one word that starts with S. And the movie I was more familiar with was Serpico, which comes out at the
Mhm.
end of the year, directed by the great Sidney Lumet. And Serpico gets Al Pacino an Oscar nomination, right? For Best
Mhm.
Actor, pretty sure. And then that was like November, December. And then earlier in the year, we get this other movie with an S, one word, Scarecrow. But I was aware of it because it co-stars Gene Hackman and Al Pacino together, and they are two of just like the all-time great actors, especially of the 70s. So the fact that there is a movie with them in it together, that's really cool. So it was always on my list. I think I want to say in the last couple of years I thought about watching it, and I said, well, let's wait for Film at 50 because we're going to talk about it. So I finally did watch it last night, and it's not like going to be the movie of the year, but I had a really good time with this. Like, what did you think of this movie?
I reflect exactly what you said there. I don't think it's anything super flashy that's going to
Extraordinary.
be,
Yeah.
yeah, that's going to be anything groundbreaking or anything like that for anyone. But I did really enjoy it. I think it knew what it was, and it knew how to utilize its star pairing to the
Mm-hmm.
best of its ability. And I had a very good time, honestly. I enjoyed it. I think I'm also really drawn to the type of movie this is, sort of that like road movie
Yeah.
drifter type of,
Mm-hmm.
almost not necessarily like plotless, but like not driven by a super heavy plot
By a three
and a
act
lot.
structure.
Yeah, exactly. So that type of movie I'm actually really drawn to. And this was, I think, a good addition to that sort of mini subgenre, if you will.
Yeah. I feel like when we think of like 70s quirky character driven films, like that's Scarecrow. Like that's like this is the kind of movie we think about when we think about, oh, those kind of movies they would make in the 1970s that didn't have any visual effects and was just about people and kind of plotless a bit. Like I feel like that's what Scarecrow is. So like if that's the idea you have in your head of what movies were like at that time, here's one of them. Right?
Yeah, I mean, also same year, I believe, was Malik's Badlands.
Yes, Badlands comes out in the fall of 73.
Yeah, so there was something in the water in 73 about the plotless road movie.
Because we're not quite to Jaws yet, as we'll talk about. Like the second half of the 70s, we still get a lot of these kind of movies, but studio heads, they start like trying to make bigger movies, trying to bring in more profit. But before we get to Jaws in June of 75, a lot of directors are just kind of like making the movies they want. They're getting low budgets often just to like, you know, like write a script and get it going. I mean, I don't know who would have read Scarecrow and was like, this is going to bring a lot of profit to our company. like there's, I mean, like as I read in my notes, like it was a major box office bomb. It didn't do very well, and it's like, well, duh. Like what about this movie outside of its two stars would bring in the audience, right?
Outside of Gene Hackman and Al Pacino, like if this movie didn't have those two, it was two lesser known performers. I don't know who would have seen it at all.
Like yeah, I don't know if this one might have been lost to time if it was two names that we didn't know of today. Like this
Right?
might have
Yeah,
just
yeah.
kind of gone away. I mean, Jerry Schatzberg, right before this, he'd made The Panic in Needle Park with Al Pacino, and that movie I want to say did better, but that's also not like it's not a genre film that would have been a huge hit at the box office or anything. But I feel like it did well enough, and that was the movie that I guess got Al Pacino into The Godfather. Like that was the footage that the studio had screened to say, okay, we're gonna let you take a chance on this unknown actor based on the footage they had seen in Panic in Needle Park. Godfather comes out in March of 72, gets Al Pacino his first Oscar nomination in the supporting actor category, which is ridiculous. I don't know, you know what your thoughts are about that, but I guess no one wanted to compete with Marlon Brando in lead. But and then this comes out in April of 73. So this would have been right after the Oscar ceremony where Al Pacino was up for supporting actor. So his star is slowly on the rise. I would say once we get to Godfather 2 and Dog Day Afternoon, like he is a
Yeah, right,
significant figure in the acting world in film.
right. Yep.
And then Gene Hackman had just won Best Actor for The French Connection in the spring of 72. and he was in a film called Prime Cut later in the summer, but he would have shot that before this. I'm assuming this is probably the first movie he made after he had won his Oscar for The French Connection, outside of maybe Poseidon Adventure that came out in December of 72, and that was like the big blockbuster of the year. So Gene Hackman's also kind of, his careers is getting really hot right now. So you have two like actors, like they're really like right on the verge of superstardom, and then they're in this little kind of road movie, which I find interesting. Like right
Yeah,
before they both break out big time, right?
each of them, relatively, whether it was the one directly before or a couple before The Godfather and The French Connection, like that, those are the big titles that you associate
Yeah.
with those names. And then right immediately after you have Scarecrow. So I mean, there's at least that's bringing some importance and legacy to this movie.
Like I don't know what they were paid for this, but I feel like if Scarecrow had come out in 75 or 76, like they would have been paid a lot more,
A
right?
lot more. They would have to triple that.
Like,
And
oh,
then
you
this
want to
movie
get
might not have
Pacino and
existed.
But it's always something exciting to me. I still to this day love it when you have like two big names who've never acted in a movie together, and then you get them together for their first film. There's always a sense of intrigue, like, oh, how are these two gonna interact? Like
Yeah,
we've seen them
exactly.
in 15 other movies separately. How are they gonna work together as a team in this movie? And that was like what I was coming into with Scarecrow. I was excited to see how they work together. Like, how did you think they were like as a screen pairing? Like, how did that work for you?
I thought they were excellent as a pairing. I thought they had right off the bat, we'll get into some of our favorite scenes, but like just kind of the opening. I loved the almost like wordless dialogue between the
Yes.
two of them, that body language conversation that they have with trying to hitch a ride.
Yeah.
And I think that introduction alone just really sold me on the pairing of the two of them and just the way that they play off each other in this almost like power dynamic type of way throughout the entire film. I find really interesting. And they're both so charismatic as a
Mm-hmm.
screen presence that, it could potentially, if you have two people like that, to actually take away if they're not meshing. But I felt like for this, I thought they worked really well together, and the personalities that they portray, I think, are really the core of the film.
Yeah, they're very different from each other. I think what this movie could have gotten into some problems if they were too similar, but Gene Hackman, his character is Max, and he's kind of more the father figure. He seems a little older, a little wiser. He's got ideas of how to make money, and he's kind of taking this younger guy, Lion, played by Pacino, under his wing. And Lion's kind of like just does what he wants, right, at any given time. He's a little bit wilder, and he's got this interesting backstory that the movie dives into in the second half about having potentially having a son with this woman, and there's all of that. But Max seems a little bit more put together, and it's one of those stories where together they don't always make the right decisions, and at one point they even go off to jail, right? They go off to prison, and together, and it's like, oh, and Max is not happy with Lion at that point. So I think their personalities are very different. They're clashing a lot, and that makes their friendship dynamic kind of interesting throughout the movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And they, we're introduced to them on the road, and they seem like they're kind of on an even playing field because they're both in the same situation, just trying to hitch a
Right.
ride. But then what I really love about how these characters develop is the situations and the locations they find
Mm-hmm.
themselves in consistently kind of shift the power in who has the
Right.
upper hand in their relationship. Like at first, Lion by Pacino, like you said, really kind of defaults to Gene Hackman's character
Right.
as the sort of natural leader of the group because he has a plan, as he says,
Mm-hmm.
throughout the entire film. He has a plan. And we see that, despite that, they find themselves in these situations where those dynamics kind of invert,
Mm-hmm.
and Al Pacino's character finds himself sort of having the power, especially in the jail sequence that
Mm-hmm.
we get. And so
Yeah.
that's really what I love about it, is that it is just following these characters, a little bit of a character study, and it's not just these two personalities that stay consistent the whole time. Like their personalities develop and intertwine with each other in different ways throughout the movie.
Yeah, I had mixed feelings about the opening shot because on one hand it's a gorgeous shot, like there's like black clouds in the sky. You watch Gene Hackman walking down this hill and he's like trying to get through that fence. It's such a striking opening image. But then the camera turns over and there's Al Pacino just standing there on this desolate road by himself, and I'm like, "Wait, why are these two guys here?" Did that bother you at all, or did you just kind of went with it? I was like, why
I
are
just kind of
they
accepted it
here in the middle of nowhere? Like it felt
yeah.
kind of easy. Like I was like, shouldn't there be a little bit more setup? Like why is Al Pacino's character specifically just standing here in the middle of nowhere?
Actually, now that I think about
That
it,
never,
like
that never struck me.
I just accepted it,
Okay.
and then I just went on with the whole movie. And now
Yeah.
that I'm looking back, I'm like, why were they there?
Like there's not an intersection. It's like, I mean, they are in the middle of nowhere. And it's like
Literally.
this is where Lion decided to hitch a ride. And then why is Max just walking down this random hill?
How did they get in the middle of the
Like
desert
where
to begin with?
were they coming from? I guess it's almost like a like mythical idea or something. We don't need to know exactly where they came
Yeah.
from. It's about where they go from here. I guess we're just supposed to, but that felt kind of weird. I don't know.
It's about the journey.
It's about the journey. So I don't know. For me, the first half of the movie was just okay. Like it's for about 45 minutes. It's very plotless, and it's just like,
yep.
They go here, they talk, they go here, they meet these women, they talk, and it's like there's really no direction. There's not a signature scene that's really drawing me in. Once they go to the prison, then the movie for me takes off. Like the last 45 minutes or so of the movie is much better than the first half. I don't know if you felt the same way.
I feel very similarly. Yes. It's definitely a little slow to really build a connection with these characters and any sort of like emotional investment with them either, because it is so heavily reliant on just following them around and following their conversations rather than following a more traditional or conventional plot structure. But there are definitely a couple key scenes, I'd say, like in the second act territory toward the middle, like you said, that really turned things around for me. And that's especially when they start with the jail sequence. That's when their power dynamic reverses, and that's when it really takes off for me as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple moments. I like that scene with the women. One of them is played by Eileen Brennan, who plays Darlene. Eileen Brennan from Private Benjamin and Clue and The Last Picture Show. I want to say, was she the only other person in the movie that I recognized? Like, I feel like most of the actors in this movie outside of the main two were new to me. Eileen Brennan has a very brief moment in the first half hour that I enjoyed.
She's one of the fights that he picks in a bar, right?
Yeah. And she's kind of got some scantily clad, like her wardrobe. She's clearly looking for something. And it's always striking to me, but like Clue is one of my favorite movies, and her look in that as Mrs. Peacock is very specific. I've grown up with that look of Eileen Brennan since I was a kid, and to see her like being sexy and like, and it's like, I'm like, whoa, what is happening?
Okay, Mrs. Peacock.
Like, do you have that with any actors? Like sometimes, like when you from kid to now, like you just kind of have this image of them at a certain age, a certain look, and then you see them 20 years younger in a movie, and you're like, what?
No, this actually, that I kind of have that phenomenon with this movie with Al Pacino.
Al Pacino looks so young in this, right?
Yeah, I love whenever because my kind of era of Al Pacino is like the current era of Al Pacino.
Yeah.
Those are like, that's what I know him as, I recognize him as. And then I you forget sometimes that what made Al Pacino who he is today, that image, that figure that we all know now, like this is the Al Pacino that built that, like the full brunette head of hair Al Pacino that that is so much fun to watch on screen. And the Dog Day Afternoon Al Pacino, like I remember when I watched that movie for the first time, I had that phenomenon a lot. And so yeah, I definitely feel that way with him with this one too.
It's cool when I'm talking about actors on this podcast for a movie released 50 years ago, and they're still active in the industry. They're still acting.
Right.
Al Pacino is still making movies. He just did season 2 of that show on Amazon Prime. Was it called Hunters? I believe just dropped a
Yep,
few
yep.
weeks ago or months ago. And so Gene Hackman retired in '04. He did Welcome to Mooseport and said, I'm out. Has been quietly retired for almost 20 years now. As of this recording, as I always say, they're both obviously still with us. I think Gene Hackman's like 94. Like he's pretty old. He's up there. He went off to be a novelist and he's been doing other things. But he gets cited here and there. They shared a picture of him, I want to say in the last 6 months. I saw on Twitter and still looks great and he's happy and that's fantastic. And but Al Pacino, boy, did he have a run in the 70s, right? Like I would say
Oh
the
yeah. Oh
only
my.
maybe the only other men who could beat him would be maybe like Jack Nicholson and Dustin Hoffman. Like those three from like 70 to 79 have a
Like
run.
the canon of 70s actors right
Yeah.
there.
I mean, I would say Nicholson kind of drops off after One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is 75. Does he have another kind of landmark performance between 76 and 79? I don't think he does. He directs a movie. I want to say it's called Going Solo in like 78. Dustin Hoffman is just bringing it one movie after another all throughout the decade. You have like Lenny and you have All the President's Men, Marathon Man. And then he ends the decade with Kramer versus Kramer and wins the Academy Award. So he has a pretty great run too. But Al Pacino, like from 72, The Godfather, all the way to the end of the decade, I believe it's called And Justice for All from 79, which I have
Yeah.
not seen, but he gets an Oscar nomination for that. Like he has an amazing run of movies and he doesn't win an Oscar for any of them in the 70s. Like
What are
that's
you
crazy
gonna
to me.
do?
He finally wins. He finally wins in 93 for Scent of a Woman.
93. Yeah. Took another 20 years.
He wins in 93. He wins Best Actor for Scent of a Woman. And Gene Hackman wins Best Supporting Actor for Unforgiven in the same night.
Same night.
Put that
Wow.
together.
I didn't know
We
that.
had a
That's
Scarecrow reunion.
the connecting
Oscars
the
night
dots right
93.
there. Look at that. Scarecrow
They,
and is embedded in the legacy of that night.
when they always take the pictures, right, with the 4 acting winners.
The quartet.
They might not have said it. Pacino and Hackman had that like look and like Scarecrow. It all came to this. But yeah, for me, it's like before we get to the prison, I was only so with the movie. I was kind of like, this is kind of a 5 out of 10. It's always interesting because these actors are great. Like you just I could watch these two guys do anything in a movie for 2 hours. Like you just like following them, and they're very specific characters that bounce well off each other. And so I like their camaraderie and their friendship that they build. But I felt like the movie needs to shake up the narrative a bit. We need to put them in a place. Something has to happen that kind of takes them somewhere else. And so when they get to the prison, everything that happens there, and then the things that we learn about Pacino's character's backstory, I found really fascinating. And where this ends up in the last 10 minutes, I was really taken with. I liked how it ends. And so, yeah. So what do we like about the prison sequence? Like, why did that work so well for you?
So the prison sequence, like I said, works for me because Gene Hackman's character really kind of defaults as the natural leader in this pairing. Like he has the business plan, he has the money stored up, and he brings Pacino's character into the movie and even names him. Like he gives him, he says Francis isn't for me. Like I got to change that. And so he lands on Lion. And so you have this like very hierarchical social structure between the two of them. And what the jail sequence does is it puts that into immediate question because it's actually Max's it's his doing that puts them back in that position. But we see a tendency of his character is he's going to blame Lion for any of his behavior. And he immediately reverts to that again when they end up back in jail. And what we see here is what we know of their personalities. Max is like very set in his ways. He's going to have things his way, his plan. When he commits to something, he's going to do it. And we know that also at the same time, Lion is a little bit more softer spoken. He's less bold, less brash, but also he's going to try to connect with you as a human. He's going to try to make you laugh, that kind of thing. And so we see that these personality characteristics and qualities of these two characters actually become useful in opposite ways in the jail setting versus out in the world. Whereas out in the world, those characteristics made Max a leader in their situation.
Right.
And they made Lion sort of more of the sidekick role. And here, Lion immediately is able to utilize that charisma, that friendliness that he shows people more easily to work his way into the good graces of the people in power, or the person in power in the jail, if you will. And so we see that their characteristics that we have already known and established and understood actually sort of get inverted in terms of how useful they are, because Max's stubbornness actually puts him in a really tough position at first. And so that's what I really enjoy, is that just kind of flipping what you've already established in the screenplay through setting to a different effect.
Yeah. As I said, the movie needed to shake things up a bit. And once we're at the prison, there's a different dynamic between the characters. They're not always in the same frame together, talking to each other. Max is very upset with Lion. And I don't know, it gave me some Banshees of Inisherin vibes with the part where he's like, I don't want to talk to you anymore. There's all these beds. I don't want to see you. You go over there. Do not talk to me. Did you get some Banshees vibes?
Max was about to start cutting off fingers, if you ask me.
Like, there's a part where, like, aren't they both like working outside, and Pacino's like on the ground and he's saying, "Hey, Max," and Max is just staring at him on that on that vehicle as it goes past.
The vehicle going by as it's going off to the hog farm.
He's looking at Lion, but not saying a word. He's like just giving him daggers with his eyes and like, I have nothing to say to you.
That's a great connection, actually.
So it reminded me a bit of Banshees, and that, at least in that section. But then this horrific, attempted sexual act on Lion happens in a back room, and I feel like the aftermath of that brings Max back into Lion's world and says, I really do care about this man, even though it seems just kind of random that how he came into my life. But that's a really brutal scene to watch. It's been interesting for me on this podcast to look at how like homosexuality or sexuality is depicted in movies starting in 1970 when I began the podcast all the way till now. And that was a difficult scene to watch. That was tough because you could see Lion thinking it's a joke for a while. He's smiling and laughing, and then all of a sudden his life is in danger. And I thought that was one of the most kind of harrowing moments of the movie, the way that the director Schatzberg shoots that and cuts that together. I think we cut away at the right time, and the makeup on Lion's face when he comes into that room and Max is just kind of slowly kind of waking up like, what's happening? Really devastating sequence in the movie.
And that also kind of, in a weird way, reflects Banshees too, when Brendan Gleeson's character sees the violence on Colin Farrell's character and shows that moment of sensitivity that like he doesn't want to be his friend, but he still does care for him. It's kind of weird how now I'm realizing there is a lot of connection there.
Might be a good double feature idea: Scarecrow and the Banshees miniature.
Maybe we'll have to do that on the rolling tape.
We'll have to add that in, yeah. But so yeah, they're in a better place after they leave the prison. Does the movie explain how they get out of prison? I feel like they're just like all of a sudden on a train. Like it was kind of quick. Was there a line that I missed?
It was my understanding that they were only there for a month.
It was just a very short sentence.
A slap on the wrist type of thing. Sentence like, hey, stop fighting in bars, please. Just go here for a month so you're not our problem for a little while type of thing.
Yeah, that's what would make sense. Yeah.
I don't know. That is one thing that I do. We'll talk about later with some critiques of the film, though. The editing threw me in a couple of places.
Right. That I felt like we needed an extra scene at that part, like to explain exactly, okay, wait, why are they getting out? Like what's happening? The movie didn't always explain itself very well. And some movies like this are kind of, they're kind of jumping around here and there, and we're not necessarily going from this day to the next day. Sometimes they'll jump around in weeks and time and things, and that happens a lot in here. And There's some great later scenes. The scene of Gene Hackman dancing is fantastic.
Oh,
What do we
yeah, yeah, you asked me, what are some of my scenes I like in this one, and man, that one's got to be up there.
I mean, he is like doing a full-on jig in a way I'm like, have I ever seen Gene Hackman do that in a movie? Like even in a comedy. Like I don't know if I've seen this before. Like he dances in the birdcage with Nathan Lane. There is that.
Yes,
But
yep.
he's kind of like a conservative there. He's not going crazy with his dancing. I mean, doesn't he take what does he take his shirt and he slides it under his butt?
He's sliding it. Yep. He's going all out, and he was proud of it too.
And
They
he
had
is
that
loving
conversation
this.
after. They had that conversation after where he was like, "They were loving me. Like I made them laugh."
And I don't know if those are extras behind him, but there's this one wide shot where he's dancing and you see these three people at a table right next to him, and the woman is losing her mind laughing hysterically. And I'm like, is this an extra? Is this someone who was just like there and he just started dancing? Was she aware that a camera was there? Like I was like, I wonder how they shot this and how they got. I mean, maybe the director was just like, all right, everybody laugh, everybody get into it. I don't know, but it worked. Like the way that the crowd was responding to Hackman in that scene was very funny.
Yeah, I mean, if I was an extra in that setting and Gene Hackman was pulling that dance right in front of me, I'd probably lose it too. So,
like that dance should be on Twitter somewhere, right? Is like a
it should.
you know,
It's
like
gotta be
there should be a
right?
little gif like just the part where he slides the shirt. Maybe it's a little too dark. I don't know. But as a lifelong Gene Hackman fan, I'm sitting there going, I don't know if I've seen him dance like this in a movie. This is great.
Well, that's what's great about some of these smaller movies for these big names is you get to see them sometimes do things that you would never see them do in
Yeah,
some of their bigger movies, which is always really cool.
we wouldn't have seen him do that in Unforgiven.
No, we certainly wouldn't. I don't think that would have been in the script.
I don't know if he would have won the Oscar. Clint Eastwood's like, this is a very serious film, but we are going to see Hackman dance for 5 minutes. It's gonna be great. Did you know Gene Hackman had reportedly stated in an interview that his performance in Scarecrow is his personal favorite? It's his favorite performance he gave on film, this movie.
I did see this fun fact, and that's honestly really impressive to me. I wouldn't have expected that.
Right.
Certainly would have never predicted it, but I'm curious what about it gave him that view of this role.
The dancing scene, of course.
It's the dancing, of course. Yeah, we should have known.
You think he would have picked a role where he was the sole lead, like where he was the star, like The Conversation, which we'll get to next year by Coppola, like where he's the sole lead of that movie. I can't remember what interview it was, but someone asked him, like, what's your favorite part? And he said, oh, I can't really choose. It's like picking your favorite child. But if I had to, there was this role I did in a movie not a lot of people have heard of. I think he said in the quote, Scarecrow back in the 70s is my favorite. So the fact that I've read, and I'll talk about it, like apparently he did not get along very well with Pacino on the movie. They have two different kinds of acting styles in terms of like rehearsal and how they get prepared for a scene that's very different, the way they prepare. So apparently they didn't get along very well. So if that was the vibe on set, like why would decades later he pick Scarecrow as his favorite role? That's weird to me.
Maybe he's just messing with the interviewer and he was like, I'm gonna give them a movie that they haven't seen and they're gonna have to go figure it out and leave some podcasters like 20 years later to feel out why I said this.
Yeah.
Maybe he's just messing with us.
He's sitting there going, what's a film title I could bring up that nobody ever asked me that I could really mess with him? Like I've always thought, like I would love, was it AV Club who done that random roles thing? Like if I were ever sitting down with a major star, I would love to talk about the films that no one talks about. Like I would bring up the 3 to 5 movies that in the last 10, 15 years, nobody talks about. Those are the ones I'm interested in. You know, if I'm sitting here with Kate Winslet, I'm not going to talk to her for an hour about Titanic, you know, because she's talked about that ad nauseum, right, for 25 years. Like I would talk about, let's get into Holy Smoke. let's talk about the Jane Campion film. But so I just thought that was interesting. Also, according to Al Pacino, he said at least at some point this was the greatest script he'd ever read. Maybe he thought that in like 72. Maybe that's not like an interview from last year. At some point, he said that. I'm like, he thought this was a better script than The Godfather?
Did he
Okay.
mix up the titles accidentally with The Godfather? Like it was printed wrong.
Yeah. But in any like whatever happened there, it seems like later on, both of these guys, have an affinity. They like this movie. It's not like they've gone on to, to say that, oh, it was a terrible working experience and I wish I hadn't done it. They both seem to have a fondness for the movie, which I appreciate. I like that they haven't gone on decades later to be like, oh yeah, I did this movie in the 70s. It's not worth your time. They seem to like it, so that's cool. What else? What else did we like about the movie in the second half?
So I can't remember if this was before the jail sequence or after, but there's a moment. So when Lion and Max go to what was it? Hit for Max's friend's house, where the two women were staying.
Okay.
Coley, I think her name was.
Oh, right. Those two women, and like one of them's getting like very up close and personal with Hackman.
Yes, to say the least. But not her, but Coley and Lion. They have a conversation, kind of just like sitting together, I think, outside on the porch. And that's actually a moment that really stuck out to me. It's nothing flashy. It's not anything. It's not Gene Hackman dancing level of memorable from this movie, but it's something I really enjoyed because so much of the screenplay is the two of them, and a lot of it is dominated by Hackman's personality at times.
Yeah.
In that moment where Lion has that conversation alongside Coley, who he doesn't even know, he was kind of just brought there alongside Hackman's plan, and they just have this really heartfelt, heart-to-heart conversation that really, I think, revealed a lot about Lion for me as a character and who he was. And also they have I think they talk about Max and wishing that like he went somewhere, and I don't know, it's just it was a very heartfelt moment. I think it's nothing that stands out from a flashy editing or cinematography or anything perspective, but that like grounded moment of dialogue was something that I thought was really personal about the film.
Yeah, I like that sometimes we would go away from scenes with Max and Lion together. Like, I feel like that's every scene, is it, of the first half?
Yeah,
They're just always talking, always together. Here we go to the bar, the restaurant. We're walking down the side. They're always talking. And that was kind of cool for a while. But eventually I felt like we needed to separate them a little bit to learn more about who they are. And so we get more of Lion by himself or with other people, not Max, in the second half.
Exactly.
So that scene's really strong. I really love the scene of him on the phone talking to the woman who had his child. And like that, towards the end, that's a really emotional scene. Like that, I feel like you don't feel is coming. Like you're not really prepared for a scene that emotionally draining in this movie. Like by the end, like what did you think of that scene where he's talking to that woman on the phone and we see the boy and then she says, oh yeah, it didn't happen. I didn't have the kid. The kid's dead. What do you think of
I slipped scene? On the ice when you left me alone.
Yeah. And he's just
that
click.
It's a boy.
It's a boy. He says to Max, it's a boy. And did you notice he jumped into the air so high that his feet were off the ground as he hugged Hackman in that scene? Like he's fully off. So I thought that was good.
Yeah, that was a really. Hold on, give me 1 second.
Oh yeah,
There's going to be some emergency vehicles.
Yeah, that happens.
Yeah, this is the only thing I always have to pause with.
Sometimes I'm listening to a podcast and I'm driving and I hear the sirens and I'm like, oh my God. And I start, has this ever happened to you? And I start kind of looking around and it's the recording. Like it's where it's happening there. I'm like, oh, okay. Sometimes it's really loud and I'm like, I'm like starting to pull over.
Busy street. Yeah. I live on a busy street. That happens every once in a while. So I just want to make sure that didn't get in your thing so that your listeners didn't have that experience.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah. So what did you think of that scene where he talks to like did you get the sense that they were in a long-term relationship? It felt to me like a woman he just like met up with a couple times and she got pregnant and then he took off. It didn't feel like they were engaged or something. Like did the movie explain like the nature of their relationship?
I think it is very ambiguous
Hmm.
what the nature of their relationship is, because even for a majority of the movie, he never really comes out and has that emotional release of I need to go to Detroit to get back to
Yeah.
her. He does admit that at one point, which convinces Max coincidentally to go through with it, because he was trying to convince him to just skip it altogether. And so yeah, it does leave it pretty unclear, because there's no backstory we have. There's no shots or scenes with them together before, and we don't even know what she looks like until this phone call.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I completely agree. It's very unclear. And what I was trying to pick up or feel out in his description of why he wanted to go back and see them was how important this person was in his life. If it was just like a one night stand that ended in a
Hmm.
child, or if they were a long term marriage. And I was leaning toward the former a little bit, how it might have been just like they were really young, they had a kid
Hmm.
and weren't prepared for that. They weren't married or anything like that. And
Right.
that's why he might have left. And so that was the direction I was leaning,
Hmm.
until that phone call conversation, and the way that that actress, forgive me, I can't remember her name, just broke down when
She
she
is
realized
devastated. You're right.
it. That really signified to me that that was more than maybe he led on for us to believe about their relationship, because she, like you said, she was devastated to hear his voice, and it just evoked a really profound and strong emotional reaction, which was something that we really hadn't gotten at any point up until then from the film. Like, we do have some stronger reactions, but more aggressive emotionally, and not that like tragic emotion that we're getting from this woman in this phone call. And so yeah, that was unexpected. It didn't seem like it was building up to something so emotional and so affecting in that way, but it worked.
Yeah, Penny Allen is her name.
Okay.
And boy, what an impression she makes in that moment. Like to be just in
She,
a movie
yeah,
for 2-3 minutes and you're just basically it's one shot, right? Just on her face on a
one
phone.
shot, yeah.
She makes a huge impression over the
Talk
for the
about just
entire
like
movie.
a single scene stealer right there.
Like Beatrice Straight kind of a thing. Like she shows
Yeah,
up
yes.
and he hangs up the phone and she's like she holds the phone for another 20 seconds and she's just like saying his name. Camera stays on her face. She's welling up with tears. And you're like, wow. I mean, this little piece of the movie could have been the whole film. Like, it could have been a story about them, and they're, maybe him trying to come reunite with his son, and I mean, that could have been the whole film. I mean, that was so interesting and a great scene, I thought.
Yeah, something you pointed out with how that's shot too is something I think is really strong about the film as a whole, with its consequences. I will caveat, but a lot of times the director and cinematographer will just linger
Mm,
on a scene
right.
or an image for quite a while. I think there's some takes where they're talking that's just kind of unbroken for
Mm,
at least a couple minutes, 2 or 3
yeah.
minutes or so, and it feels very natural to the sensibility of how this film was shot and how it's presented. This sort of just lingering quality where it's they're not moving fast through life, but we're also not moving fast through these cuts. I think it
Hmm.
works for the most part. I think there are a couple moments where it like overstays its welcome in a conversation,
Yeah.
but in that one in particular where it lingers on her for a while, that
Mm.
that was definitely a good
Yeah,
move with that shot.
I feel like other directors might have chosen because we don't really see that person before or after. Like some directors might have chosen to just stay on Al Pacino's face for the whole talk. I think that the conversation's too long. That would have been kind of deadly to just stare at Al Pacino. So because we do mostly stay with him and with Hackman, like we're not really like cutting to other stuff. So some directors might say, well, this breaks with the point of view. But I think we needed that. We needed her face and her emotion. And how creepy was it? How close did that kid look like Al Pacino?
Oh my God. I'm actually so glad you said that, because when they showed him for the first time, I was like, did they just like clone a mini Al Pacino? Like,
It looks like little Al Pacino.
for a small movie, what an excellent casting choice. That
Yeah.
for a kid that for a child role that doesn't even have
I don't
a
think he
line.
talks, right?
No, and they managed to find like the most just Al Pacino look-alike kid that it was actually kind of shocking. So I'm glad I was not alone in that experience.
You thought that too? I was like, I mean, we see him at least 3 times, and I'm going, man, and like this casting director needed to win something for that. Like that was insane. Like how much he looks like Al Pacino. So I'm like, if he were to go back there and she's like, oh no, sorry, Lion, this is not your kid. I don't think he'd believe her. I think he could prove that one in court. This is my son. But so
I was like, did they pull some Irishman de-aging in the 70s here?
Yeah, before that was a thing, like in modern times, they did a de-aging of Al Pacino. And somehow it looks better than it does in The Irishman. But so we have to talk about the title. So the title Scarecrow is strange, and you're watching the movie like, why is it called that? And then right before Gene Hackman dances, right, they talk about Scarecrow. Like, what did you make of that conversation? Like, why do you think the movie is called Scarecrow?
So I actually think it is a pretty clever sort of metaphor for their journey and their story together, from complete strangers to this intertwining of their personalities to you just all the things that they go through. I actually do think it works in a bit of an odd way. The thing is, I do wish it didn't talk about it so much. Because they do bring it up, I think, at that point somewhat midway through the movie, but then they also bring it up like a couple more times.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, I do think this is working on a metaphorical, ideological level for a film that isn't necessarily, exercising the biggest intellectual guts that a film has ever strived for.
Yeah.
I do think it was a nice sort of grounded backstory to it all that sort of just backs up this relationship that we're examining and we're studying through these two characters. I think it fits their personalities in a really unique way. And when I can be surprised by how a title comes into fruition, like, I mean, usually it's going to be obvious for the most part, like where the title came from. This is truly a movie where it's like, I do not know where this came from. Yeah. And so they did have to explain it. They couldn't have avoided it, because it would have, like, imagine if they never have those conversations and it's just called Scarecrow out of nothing. So I do actually really enjoy that about it. I just think they could have maybe talked about it a little less, just to give you a little bit more of like, yes, I'm figuring this out. They're not. It's
a bit of an it's hard, because if you don't say anything, it's kind of weird. But then it's kind of an eye roll when they say the word Scarecrow like 7 times in a conversation, like comparing themselves to scarecrows and scaring people off and blah blah blah. And this kind of fits our personalities, and it's like, oh, okay, movie, we don't need to go that far. I think we got it. But how many people do you think have watched this movie thinking it was about Batman?
Oh, I hope a lot. I hope that should have been the key marketing campaign behind it.
Like, it should have been like, to get more people in the theater opening weekend, it should have been Adam West going like this.
Bam, pow.
Like, anytime there's a little struggle, like a fist fight in the movie, like, just the pow thwack. Not in the movie, but just in the advertising. Right?
Yeah.
There would have been a lot of angry people on Friday night, Saturday afternoon, but would have had a bigger opening weekend.
They could have played the whole like Blair Witch is a documentary marketing thing where they just like sell it as this thing and then it's something else. And
They could
it
do
would have been.
a 50th anniversary limited screening engagement for this movie and say before Cillian Murphy in Batman Begins.
Listen, I don't know who the producers studio behind this was, but listen, if you're listening to this podcast, we've got some ideas for you right now.
Hey, they brought out The Godfather. I mean, maybe this isn't quite at the level of The Godfather in terms of how many people would show up. I mean, I think if Gene Hackman was still active in the industry, he was still in his early 90s, like appearing in movies and things, as Al Pacino is, like maybe there would be a little bit more interest. I don't know how many young people today would respond to this movie, but I can see the advertising like before Cillian Murphy in Batman Begins. See
It's
Gene
writing
Hackman and
itself.
Al Pacino in Scarecrow.
The poster is Gene Hackman with the shirt between his legs.
It's him going like it's like Al Pacino looking on in the top corner of the poster, like his mouth open, like horrified. Like, it's both a comic book movie and a comedy, and then you watch the movie and you're like, "What is this?"
It's your favorite Palme d'Or Tide winning film.
Speaking of hilarious, did you read this? To understand their characters, Al Pacino and Gene Hackman donned costumes and posed as beggars in San Francisco.
I did not read
Did
that.
you read that? Like, you imagine, like
That's
people,
news to me.
most people wouldn't have known who they were. This probably would have, they probably shot the film in mid 72 ish if it came out in April of 73. So probably spring, summer of 72. They were walking through San Francisco in character. Like I wonder how long they did that for. Like, was that a day? Was it like a couple weeks? Like, how much did they commit to that
I hope
preparation?
it was for an amount of time where it started to become awkward for everyone involved how long it was going on.
Because like you think, because they have dissimilar acting styles, you think one of them would have said, "We don't have to do that." You know, I could see Hackman being like, "Al, we don't have to go pretend to be these characters for a few days in San Francisco." But I could see Al being like, "No, we got to do this, good in character to get it right." Because as I said before, they didn't get along so well on the movie. Pacino is an advocate of method acting. He found his techniques conflicted with those of Hackman, who would be very silent before shooting, while Pacino would pace back and forth between before the next shot.
I've heard stories of the pacers versus the quiet thinkers
So
on set.
they're setting up the next shot. Hackman's sitting there very still, just thinking about his lines. How's he going to approach it? And he's looking over at Pacino, just walking back and forth. I could see Hackman like, "Sit down. What are you doing?" So Pacino later said it was not the easiest working with Hackman, although I do love him as an actor. So I don't think they were like at each other's throats during the movie, but I think their acting styles differed enough to where it was kind of tricky.
Little tension in the room.
Before and after cut. I found a quote by the director Jerry Schatzberg, who said that Gene Hackman was very difficult to work with. He would argue with everyone on the set, including his own brother Richard Hackman, who was working on the movie as his stand-in. To get back at Gene, Schatzberg gave Richard a part in the film. I didn't look close enough. I don't know who he plays, but Gene ended up being totally delighted that his brother was in the movie. So it didn't. So Schatzberg was planning revenge schemes to get Hackman angry. Like, that's how well these guys were working together on the set of Scarecrow. Doesn't seem productive.
The set of Scarecrow sounds like it would have been just a ball to be a fly on the wall for.
Yeah, it's that old idea of Gene Siskel would say, "Is this movie we're watching more interesting than a documentary about the actors on the set of the film eating lunch?" Right? Have you heard that quote by Gene Siskel?
Yeah.
And I think about that sometimes when I'm watching kind of a boring movie that's not really working for me, that has a great cast, a great director. I do think to myself, a 30-minute short documentary about these guys eating lunch probably would be more interesting. I don't think that
I'd
was the
watch it.
case. I don't think that was the case for this movie, but it seems like not everything was a ball on the set. And yeah, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall here, like to see how they would interact before and after shots. Really interesting. Before we get to my final pieces of trivia, I've got one big award, and I wanted to share one really interesting thing that happened in 2012 with this movie. What do we think of the ending? Like the last 10 to 15 minutes, we leave these characters at a very kind of sad state, right? This is not a happy ending in many ways. We spoil things on Film at 50, so we're going to talk about the end now. If the best way to listen to, as I say on my conversations here, is to look at the film first and then join us here. This is not 50 years ago. We can spoil some things. What did we think of the ending, where we leave these characters?
So remind me again where it plays out after the phone call. Where do these characters go again?
So we have that really devastating moment where Max and Lion are walking around that fountain, remember? And there's all those kids kind of surrounding them.
Oh my God. Okay.
And then
yes.
Lion picks up one of the kids and just starts like walking into the fountain.
Okay.
And he's clearly having these, almost like doubts about what she might have said to him over the phone. He's almost like having a mental breakdown, right? Like, because I think he's been dreaming about this moment he's going to have with his son. And it's kind of like this woman took that away from him. And so he picks up this kid and he's walking into the fountain and people start shouting, like, what are you doing? And then Max turns around and just starts charging towards him. And it takes like 20 seconds to like pry the kid away from him. And it's kind of like, it's kind of tense. And then the next scene, he's Lion's being like taken into the hospital, right? Like he's had like a breakdown. He's not well. And the last time we see Al Pacino in this movie, he's like on a gurney being wheeled into a hospital.
Yeah, that was unexpected. Also,
yeah,
I didn't see that because it's like a road movie. We expect to like ride off into the sunset or something.
Yeah,
and wow, that fountain scene. That was hard, honestly, hard to watch.
Yeah.
That really cut into me and was difficult because almost similarly to the reaction we get from this woman on the phone in a moment that we're not sure the depth of the gravity of what it's going to actually employ.
Mm-hmm.
Very similarly to that, I think we don't realize how much this means to Lion. I think he very much holds back, even all the way until the end, how much that moment, like, and I think we can maybe in hindsight realize that in the way that he's carrying the box with the lamp so cautiously throughout the entire film. Like they're constantly traveling, and the one constant is that box.
He always has that.
Exactly.
It's like a Christmas gift.
That's almost like a really great prop in a way that they only talk about it a couple times, but it's always there as a sort of reminder in hindsight now to understand just how much this means to him as that phone call, that interaction. I think what the movie doesn't let on, which is actually a really interesting strategy in not divulging this to us, but letting us kind of piece it together, is that this meant everything to him,
right?
To try to reconnect with this woman and with his child, who he doesn't even know.
He's never met,
boy or a girl. And so clearly this weighs on him to such an extent that when it passes, almost just like that, it's almost like, when your life, you're like so leading up to something and then it feels like it just goes by with the snap of a finger.
Yes.
It's like that with him, and the way that he just almost just is destroyed by it, and to the point where he has this, maybe it's a panic attack. Just it felt very raw and very real in a way that built the stakes to a point where you didn't see it coming in that capacity, and it was very difficult to see the struggle that he dealt with in the aftermath. And so yeah, just the whole last 10-15 minutes just takes it to a emotional place that you really couldn't have expected through a lot of the movie, but it is really powerful in a way that I think is strong and kind of shocking in a way.
And I think it was an interesting choice to not get a sense that Lion's going to be okay. Like we don't get a scene of Max and Lion, meeting up the next day or a couple days later. He goes to see him in the hospital, and we get a sense at the end, okay, Lion is in a bad place, but he'll be okay. We don't know. Like the movie doesn't allow you to believe that he'll be fine. Like he could be close to death. We don't really know, because the last
he could have already died.
He could have died. The movie doesn't tell us, right? He just like gets wheeled off, and then our last scene is with Max trying to get the train ticket. which is a great way to end this movie, because when we meet these guys, they're kind of lost and just trying to like find a way to keep living for another day. And that's where we find him at the end. Like Lion is not in a good place. And then what is Max trying to get a ticket for? $29 and
it's 50 like cents 20, or something. It's like $27.95, and he pulls out
a few bucks,
and then he's got it's again the lingering in that shot, because he has to pull out his shoe to get the heel off to get some more money, but he can't get it off. And then he pulls out a pocket knife. Like the whole time I was like, imagine if this was like a government building or something. He whips out a pocket knife to get money out of his shoe. Like that would not fly today.
Like the way that this flies. So specific at the end, because so he doesn't have enough money, but he has an idea. He thinks he knows where he has stored a $10 bill. As this other woman is walking up, and she's just paying for her ticket, there's no issue. And he's like scraping like the bottom of his shoe off, and there's like this $10 bill. It's like this. It's like just like, and he just kind of crumples it, and then he pulls it out, and then he's smiling at the lady.
It's the way he's like he holds up the $10 bill, and he's like, aha, like I
got this. Now I got the sense at the very end, like he still has not reached the amount of money he needs, right? Isn't he like $1 short, or does he have enough? Like it cuts away. I wasn't sure. It wasn't totally clear to me if he had. Like I thought the movie was trying to tell us that he still doesn't quite have enough to leave. But did he have enough?
That's possible. Honestly, I
did you read it as he did?
Sure. I read it as he did, but
okay.
I could have also just been accepting that at face value.
It seemed to me like even like you can read it either way. Like even if he does have enough money to get on that train, like things are not really looking up for him if he has to get $10 that way.
Maybe this is just some genius Rorschach test about like, did he pay for the ticket or not? What is your are you an optimist or a pessimist? Let's find out. Jerry Schatzberg.
Like I think he had, even if he was $1 or $2 short, like he would have found a way to get those other $2. I think he would have gotten on the train. We don't see him do it, but the movie opens with him driftless, just kind of or drifting like down that hill, and it's kind of, we leave the characters in the same place. Like they're not in a better place than they were at the beginning. Like he doesn't seem to have a plan moving forward.
And Lion was an interesting way to in a worse place.
And Lion's in a worse place. He might be dead by the time the movie cuts to black. And then Max is searching his shoe for money to pay for a train ticket. So yeah, this is what I also love about movies from the 70s. It's like many of them don't end on a happy note. Like you don't have to feel like walking out of the theater, I feel better about my life. Like it's sometimes they end with, they haven't really learned a lot from their experiences, and they're kind of in the same place as they were at the beginning. And some movies can end like that, and this one does, and I like that about it. It was the right ending to me. It wouldn't have felt right if they were on the back of some truck smiling at each other as we get like a beautiful like crane shot with the sunset. Like that wouldn't have worked, right?
I was also predicting like maybe it'll be like Thelma and Louise, like they'll end up riding off into the sunset, or like riding off the cliff
riding off into the sunset, like literally
off. Yeah.
Would that have taken us by surprise if all of a sudden the last like 90 seconds of Scarecrow is shot by shot the same as Thelma and Louise?
That
like
would be something.
They kiss, right? They give each other the kiss. There's the
Okay, now
Polaroid.
we're
There's
here.
there's the Polaroid on the back of
Now
the
we're on
car,
to something.
and then
We
they just
this
go flying off the cliff.
between the Adam West revival here and this idea, I think we're really stoking a flame on the revival of Scarecrow.
All of a sudden, we're like questioning the original screenplay win for Callie Curry for Thelma and Louise. Like, wait, Scarecrow did it first. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's weird in that Thelma and Louise is a more uplifting ending, and yet they die. So it's like
Right, yeah.
how
And like
Ridley
they're
Scott and
alive and we feel so down.
how Ridley Scott was able to make the ending of Thelma and Louise uplifting, but as they die. But then you get to the end of Scarecrow, and you're not feeling very confident about, especially Lion, but also Max's. Like, if the movie were to spend another half hour with Max, I don't think it's going to end well. Like, he's not
No,
going in the
no.
right direction.
That's part of what's interesting about his character though, is that he has this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy cycle that he's in. And Lion even questions it at one point because he almost starts this is what leads into the dancing, I think, actually, is he almost starts a fight and Lion is like, he just looks at him, he's like, do you learn? Like, you just went back to jail for doing the same
Yeah.
thing that put you in jail originally, and you're gonna do it again right now?
To make a more uplifting ending, we could have gotten a reprise of the dance. No, you know what could have been? He could have like been $4 short. Like, he needed 29 and he only had 25. So
You see him
put out like a violin case or something. And you see him like dancing, like trying to get people to throw quarters in. That could have been
I could see
like
it.
over the end credits.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think that would have ended on the right note, but it would have made me laugh. Anyway, I liked a lot of this movie. I would give it like, I don't know, what would you give it? Like a 6.5 out of 10?
Yeah,
Like
somewhere in that range.
Kind of a soft, kind of like 3 stars. Like, if you like these two guys, it's definitely worth a watch. Just don't expect like some kind of masterpiece, hidden gem. It's not at that level. But
I mean, I think it's worth seeing if you have any interest in these actors, obviously. And I think actually, if you keep your expectations, in the right place, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah. So the big award it won was at the 73 Cannes Film Festival. So I guess it opened in the US in April of 73, and then it played at Cannes in May of 73. Some movies do that, right?
That's interesting. Yeah.
I mean, that it doesn't happen very often these days. Like, with like major,
I don't think that happens today anymore.
Major releases. Like, sometimes there'll be like a big studio release. Like, wasn't like Shrek 2 a part of the Cannes?
Yeah.
Like, it'll open, and then 2 weeks later they'll have a screening at Cannes. Like, that happens.
It won't be like in competition, but they'll do like a special
out of competition
screening for it, right?
Most of the
this
movies
was in
we
competition,
read about,
obviously.
Yeah, it was in competition. It won a major prize. I guess it won the interim equivalent of the Palme d'Or, the Grand Prix de Festival International de Film, shared with The Hireling, a movie directed by Alan Bridges. I don't know much about that title. So that was like the big award it won. It did not get any Oscar nominations, Golden Globe. Like, this movie was kind of pushed aside, and when it came to Pacino, the focus was on Serpico, which came out at the end of the year, which is I saw it many years ago. I'm excited to watch it again. I think is a better film than Scarecrow is. We'll get to that in November, December. But the critics were, in favor of it. No big raves. Roger Ebert compared the story to Of Mice and Men, which I like that comparison.
Yep.
And Midnight Cowboy, which came out in 1969. He positively reviewed the performances of Pacino and Hackman. In the New York Times, Vincent Canby called Max and Lion classic drifters, marvelously realized characters. So I don't think any critics were giving it like 5 stars, but they were mostly kind. Like, most of the reviews at the time were favorable, not negative. My last piece of trivia about the movie, which I found really interesting, by 2012, Scarecrow was among the best reviewed films in Jerry Schatzberg's career. After gaining a cult following, Schatzberg recruited Seth Cohen to write a sequel, Scarecrow 2, and a screenplay was completed by the end of 2013. The sequel was set years after Scarecrow, with Max and Lion reuniting and Lion learning that his son is alive. The sequel was complicated by the studio's lack of support and Hackman's retirement from acting. Maybe before they went ahead with this sequel, maybe Schatzberg might have thought, well, wait, Gene Hackman doesn't act anymore. Right?
That probably would have been a good due diligence to start with.
Like, maybe before we hire someone to write a sequel screenplay for a year or whatever it was, like, maybe get in touch with Hackman. Like, would you be on board with this? What would that have looked like, do you think? Like a 2013, 2014 Scarecrow 2 with these guys. That would have been an
I don't
interesting film.
First of all, a 2013 film called Scarecrow 2 immediately puts me in like DC MCU territory. Like Scarecrow 2.
It would have been Son of Scarecrow.
Scarecrow 2 in the Quantumania.
Like, did you see like premiering at Cannes this year, Scarecrow 2, and it's Hackman and Pacino? It's like, what? Like that was, yeah, that probably shouldn't have. I mean, maybe they just did it for funsies. The director, he made his last movie in like the 90s or something. He's just like, I got some extra cash, let's hire someone to write me a screenplay sequel. But apparently that exists. I would read it. I would read the sequel. I'd be curious, like, what that screenplay reads like.
Yeah,
just to see what their ideas were.
I have a question about that screenplay, though, that maybe changes my reading of how this movie is interpreted. How did you read when Pacino leaves that phone call and he jumps into Hackman's arms and he like yells, "It's a boy.
It's a boy."
How did you read that? Because I was questioning, like, am I reading this as he knows this woman is lying and he is alive as a boy, or is like, what was your interpretation of that?
I read it as he believed her when she said the kid was dead, and he was just trying to kind of save face in front of Hackman, in front of Max.
Got it.
That's how I read that, because it was strange, because it doesn't feel 100% convincing that she's like that the son is dead, right? Over the phone, she kind of hesitates. Oh, he's not with, like, it did feel like he was questioning that, but he was at like such a huge reaction of like jumping on, like, oh my God, it's a boy, you won't believe this. It was like he was doubting the truth in that moment and just wanted to explode with excitement, jumping into Hackman's arms. Like, that's how I read it, because then a couple scenes later, he's like, like wanting to kill himself in that fountain. He's so depressed. So, yeah. But you could read it both ways. You could read it as he knows his son exists. This woman was lying to him. She does not want him to be a part of his son's life.
That's how I read it originally.
And so when he's so depressed in that fountain, it's his realization that I don't think I'm ever going to get to meet this kid. Like, she doesn't want me to be a part of it. You could read it like that, or you could read it as he believed her and he's like, oh my God, my son does not exist. But yeah, you could make you could make arguments for both sides. I could see the other side also being a thing. That's just how that was just my reading right on the first watch. Maybe that might change later. I don't know.
That is interesting.
You read it the other way.
I read it the other way. Yeah. Okay. And the sequel would clarify it for us.
The sequel apparently makes it clear that Lion does not die in the hospital. Lion is not dead.
Yeah. There's a lot the sequel has to offer.
40 years have passed, and I'm curious, so Jerry Schatzberg's like, man, this is getting a cult following. I need to make a sequel 40 years later. Like, what kind of a cult following is he talking about? Is it like being brought up in a lot of interviews and everyone's buying the Blu-ray? Like, what's going on there? Like, what makes him think that this is in need of a sequel 40 years later? That's weird.
Are we also led to believe that 40 years from the end of this movie, both of these men have not died somehow?
Like, they're dead.
Like, they're either in jail or dead.
There's no way. Like, I could see a 20 years later sequel. Like, that would make more sense to me.
Most.
20 years later, maybe one of them or both have better lives. But it's like, okay, so then the son would be like in his 20s. Here, the son would be in his 40s. Like, can you imagine Pacino in 2014, like trying to reconnect with his 45-year-old son,
Honestly, the more interesting sequel for
played by
me would
Bradley
be
Cooper.
to just follow the son, like in the aftermath of his father's death, like
Oh, okay.
trying to find out who his father was.
Oh, right. I mean, maybe. I mean, Jerry Schatzberg, he's not stupid. He had to have known, like, Gene Hackman's not coming back after 10 years to do a Scarecrow 2. Like, that's not happening. So it would have made sense more to do, like, what if we told a story not about Hackman's character, but about Pacino's character? Pacino would have come on board, I think, right? He
Yeah,
probably would do
probably.
it for enough money
Right.
or
For enough,
whatever.
there was a number that he would do it for.
And it could be like Pacino could have played a supporting role in the movie, and the majority of the focus could have been on Lion's son and where he is now, and like reconnecting with his father or something. And it could be just like kind of thinly related to the 73 Scarecrow, but
Yeah,
could be like this
exactly.
other thing that if you have
Right.
seen the earlier film, it's like it adds it enriches your experience, but it could just exist as its own thing. I mean, nobody in 2014 is like, man, where's that Scarecrow sequel? Like, I don't think a lot of people going to see a new Pacino movie in 2014 would be like, oh man, I got to go back and watch that, the first one. So that's the approach that I would have taken. Like, tell the story of the son and then have Pacino come into it in like the second half or something,
I think so
and
too.
maybe like have him talk about my friend Max passed away last year. We were best friends to the end, and there's like a picture of Gene Hackman on his like on his dresser drawer or something, or on his desk, like in Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, where you see that framed photo of Sean Connery, because he didn't want to come out of retirement to be in Indy 4. Probably made the right call. Anyway, are you sad the sequel wasn't made?
Well, now I am. I wasn't before, but like now that we've talked about it, like we should get to writing, honestly.
Yeah, we should connect with Seth Cohen. And I mean, who really cares about a 40th anniversary sequel? It's all about the 50th
The
anniversary
50th.
sequel. We're getting one this year, The Exorcist. We're getting a
Yes.
50th anniversary sequel to The Exorcist with Ellen Burstyn. 91-year-old Ellen Burstyn is
Wow.
back playing the same role she did in the 73 movie, which
Is
is
it still
amazing.
on? I think it's still untitled at this point, unless that was a
Untitled
recent.
Exorcist.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something
It's
like that.
probably going to just be called The Exorcist. I'm going to drive me up the wall.
Why are they beating around the bush with it? Just get to the straight to the facts here. It's gonna be The
Yeah,
Exorcist.
that's probably what they'll do. But so we could have a 50th anniversary sequel to Scarecrow. Now we're just talking just gibberish. Maybe it'll happen. Probably
I'm
not.
getting on the spec script right now.
Let's track down Seth Cohen. Let's make it happen. So my last question about the movie I ask of each guest, Danny, before we move on to our final two segments: if someone was to remake Scarecrow now, like if someone took this story, this script, updated it, made a new version of the same story in 2023, like how would it be similar? How would it be different, do you think? Like how would it look now if they made this movie?
Oh wow.
It's always kind of a big
That
question.
that is a big
Thinking
question.
about how
Wow.
much movies have changed over 50 years. Like thinking of how movies are released and streamed and everything today. You got like
Mm.
two modern day powerhouse actors to play Max and Lion in a new Scarecrow. Like, what do you think that would look like?
Wow, putting this movie in the context of something it was so separated from, which is
Mm.
like the streaming model, and that almost braced my brain to think of like this little hidden 70s movie that just is happy to exist, and like putting it in like the chaos of modern film economy
Mm.
is like is a pretty crazy proposition. I I sadly feel like the like cynic of the response to the current state of the industry
Yeah.
would be like this movie would it would get like some weird little distributor, and it would show up on like Hulu after like a week in theater to like die, and like everyone would forget about it instantly.
It'd
It
be
would,
Momentum Pictures distributor,
yeah.
the two Leslies distributor.
Maybe like maybe it would have like a grassroots effort to get the woman on the phone call
A supporting actress,
a
not
best supporting actress nomination last minute. Honestly,
yeah.
I could see it.
Yeah, that could be like Allison Janney, or it could be like a really good supporting actress winner, and like they just get like just one dynamic scene on the phone,
Yeah, right.
and then we're all like jumping out of our seats when they announce her name as the best supporting actress. I don't know. Like it happened with Judd Hirsch in The Fablemans, right? I
Yeah.
often talk about how like to get into supporting actor and actress now, you have to be in like half the movie. Like it's hard to just be in a scene or two and then get a nomination. It happened for Judd Hirsch. He's in what, 8 minutes of the movie? Like, and it's just
Yeah,
a
yep.
little sequence in the middle.
Exactly.
You never see him before or after. So it can happen. I do think it's hard to get a nomination for one scene. Like if you're one scene, it's very tough to get in.
You got to
Like
be Judd
Samantha
Hirsch to
Morton.
do it.
Samantha Morton
Morton,
in
that's
She Said.
right. That's one that
Great
we
scene.
actually talked about in some of our like predictions was if we're talking like one scene wonders this
Right.
year,
That
Samantha
was
Morton and She Said should have been considered.
yeah. I mean it's a long scene. It's not like it's 2 minutes. Like it goes on for a while, and but that's the only time we see her, and I just feel like it's tough to get in for that one scene. Like I love David Lynch at the end of The Fablemans. I was like rooting for him. If Hirsch wasn't a part of the conversation, like I'd have been like, let's, but you know, what does he say? Like 8 lines. He's like doesn't say much, so it's hard to get in there. But yeah, I think like I feel like a modern day version of this, not a lot would change. I don't know if like I guess you would update it to modern times, but there's still a lot of people in the country just kind of drifting, you know, from
Yeah.
one town to the next. I mean, I don't think a lot of that would change. I think the prison sequence would be different. I don't know if that, I think that would have to be changed a little bit.
The
But
money conversations would probably be a lot different.
hopefully they wouldn't talk about scarecrows as much in the new version. Maybe they wouldn't call it Scarecrow. They would call something else. It'd be too
I think
confusing for audiences now.
I think one thing I would hope that this movie would improve if it was made 50 years later is the agency of some of the female characters a
Right.
little bit,
Mm-hmm.
who outside of Coley, really the only female
Yeah.
characters we have are sort of desired by or desire Gene Hackman's character.
Mm.
And so I would love to see the film evolve that a little bit if it were to be brought into the modern day, and maybe it builds a female character a little bit stronger. Maybe it builds Coley a little bit better to be more integral to kind of examining their relationship.
We could flip the genders too. It could be two women at the heart of the
That's
story.
true. That's also
Right?
true.
I mean, I feel like the conversation with like the guy on the phone would read kind of strange about the kid. So that would have to be switched. But yeah, like a person of color, have it be two women. Like I think in modern times you can't just tell this story again with two straight white men. Like it's just like, you gotta mix it up a little bit if you're gonna do it again. We talk about it all the time. Like there are some films that I feel like could in the next 10 years with the streaming model and with 8 episode series, a lot of these titles that have some sort of like recognition to some people, like could maybe be done again. It happens all the time. But then you get, probably half the episodes I do in a year. It's like, no one's ever going to touch this again. And I think that is the case with Scarecrow. I think this just stays in the past. I don't think we'll get another version of this, especially since the title would be confusing to modern audiences. That doesn't help, right?
Yeah, that's yeah.
All right, so that takes us to our final two segments. The first one is the Divine Double Feature. What's a modern film you would pair with Scarecrow? Like, what did you think about for that?
All right. So I was actually thinking about this the whole time I was watching it
Yeah.
because I was really gearing up for this question because it's something that we do in our podcast, the double feature.
So you do it too? Okay, cool.
We're always thinking about this. And so the film that I would pair, there was actually, I was going through mulling a lot of options, but a lot of the options I was thinking about were also sort of road movies in the 20th century. And I was like, oh, that's a good one. But it's like, oh, wait, that was actually not modern. And so I was like, I kept going back and forth with that. But the film I ultimately landed on was Nomadland from 2020.
That's a good one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Best Picture winner at the Oscars, which we actually talked about those Oscars a little bit
off
air beforehand. But Yeah, so I would pair Nomadland with this film because first of all, I think it's an exquisite film. I absolutely thought it deserved its best picture win
Hmm.
personally. I know
Yeah,
it's
it's great.
a little bit of a weird year with the pandemic and everything, but I really loved Nomadland and the way that Chloe Zhao approached this screenplay,
Hmm.
working with non-actors to tell the story of this woman just kind of embarking through the journey in the West, living
Hmm.
out of a van as sort of a traveling nomad. And I think although the story it's not like a one-to-one comparison in terms of the journeys that these characters are going on
Hmm.
in comparison to Scarecrow, but the way that it expresses that lifestyle of the drifting in a modern lens, like how someone survives and and lives that life in our current time,
Right.
I think would be a really interesting pairing with Scarecrow, with these two characters who are doing it back in the 70s and have a very different economy and very different just societal acceptance of what they're doing in
Mm.
comparison to what Nomadland is examining.
Yeah, that's a great choice. I loved Nomadland. That was my third favorite film of 2020. And I had a really rough time at the end of that year with all of the awards contenders. A lot of them did not connect with me at all, but Nomadland did. I thought that was really emotionally rich, great central performance. And that would be a really cool pairing with our movie today. Like I can see that. And especially like the pacing and the quietness and it's
Yeah.
not necessarily two people always together, but I mean, almost every scene she's having some sort of engagement with another person, and like the David Strathairn character, their connection's really interesting. That's a great choice. I love that movie. I feel like, do people like, what is the feeling now about Nomadland's Best Picture win? Are people on board with it? Do you think 2 years
I
later,
don't
or
know. I see in my I guess my opinions may be biased or like maybe I'm in the minority, but I think it was a great choice
yeah,
and I think it just in an odd year where there wasn't a ton of films, I think to give
yeah,
it to something that was smaller and different in that capacity
right,
was ultimately a good choice. I do unfortunately get the feeling though that it's kind of remembered as the winner because there weren't other
of the
options that
pandemic. Hmm.
yeah. And so I think it kind of has that legacy of oh, there were, no big movies that would have won instead, and it kind of gets forgotten.
Right.
And
Hmm.
so that's unfortunately the vibe I do get surrounding that win. But for me personally, it's actually up there on especially recent like 21st century wins. It's
Hmm.
up there for me.
Yeah, definitely. That film really has the flavor of 70s cinema, like character driven, quieter cinema that you don't see as much anymore in movies. I really like that about it. I do think people are happier with that win than they are with Coda's Best Picture win.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think for many
Me
people,
included. Me
for
included
I
on
think for
that.
many people, Nomadland is one of the better picture wins of the last few years for sure. I went with another very modern film, one of my favorite films from last year that did not get into the Oscars, and that is Bones and All. Did you see Bones and All?
Ah, I thought about choosing this. So my thought process was I immediately went to Badlands. I love
Oh, okay.
Badlands, great
Hmm.
film. And when I saw Bones and All, I was like, this is Badlands. Yes. And I thought about choosing it. I thought about choosing it, but I was like, it's too far of a departure with the cannibalism. And I was
Right.
like, maybe, but I'd love to hear your interpretation of why you chose it.
Oh, I just was thinking anytime I have on this podcast to champion Bones and All, which is a movie that I wasn't quite sure how I was going to handle it, like a cannibalism story, a love story, and I thought it was beautifully told, well acted, and so many striking images, and the whole idea of these two people connecting and drifting through life. I found like there were some parallels with some of the thematic ideas in Scarecrow, and kind of like a couple moments of sudden violence in the second half, especially of Bones and All, that we do get in Scarecrow, like at the prison, and we get kind of not really violent with the kid or anything, but in the fountain there are some moments of kind of hysterics and craziness that we get to much bigger effect in Bones and All. Like that last scene with Mark Rylance is I have not been able to get that scene out of my head. Like that scene is intense. And I get it. I get why Bones and All didn't do very well this award season. It's just very brutal, and the subject matter. I mean, I get it, but I loved it. Like I thought it was great. I walked out of the theater very happy. I was like, that was awesome. That's a great film. And so I just, yeah, any chance I get to champion it. You think I might bring it up again when we're talking Badlands later this year?
Oh yeah. Yeah,
male
no,
and
that's a
female
fantastic choice.
in that movie. So, but yeah, Bones and All, I feel like has just been completely ignored the last couple months. I haven't heard anything about it. I'm not seeing it on a lot of top 10 lists. It was on
everyone's
mine.
Everyone's talking about the awards movies at this point, of
Right.
course. But yeah, no, I'm completely with you. Bones and All was actually, I think, I can't remember if it was like top 10 or like just outside top 10 for me this
it's my
year.
number
so
8.
It was up there.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was maybe like 11 or 12. But yeah, it was a film that I saw at NIF originally.
Oh, okay.
And I really enjoyed it, but it was a lot to digest the first time because it took me a little while to get on the wavelength of like where it was striking a balance with its genres and everything. So it took me like a little while to invest in how he was approaching it.
Yeah.
Then I rewatched it and I was able to go in knowing the sensibility and knowing the pace and everything that he's employing, and I just loved it. So good. Taylor Russell is phenomenal.
Yes, she was great. It was a lot to digest. Like how much to digest?
It was, you could say roughly Bones and All.
I was kind of pulling for a Mark Rylance surprise Oscar nomination. I thought he needed to get in somewhere, but he is really creepy and great in his scenes in that movie. It seems weird to me that performance was just completely pushed aside. Like he's great.
I mean, talk about someone committing and adding value to a film with whatever they have. Like, I mean, he is terrifying, unrecognizable,
really creepy.
Just committed, creepy, all of the above, and he just eats it up, if you will.
Yeah. But I feel like if he can win for Bridge of Spies, that very quiet performance in Bridge of Spies, I'm like, it would be cool to see on his resume another Oscar nomination and supporting actor for something that's very different. That's like a lot bigger, but also just like a totally different character and tone and all of the vibes he gives us. I really liked him in that. And I think it would be an interesting double feature with Scarecrow because we go to some darker places in Bones and All, but we kind of get some of the same sensibilities in a much more modern setting and, male and female and everything that happens in that story. If you're scared of Bones and All, don't be. It's really good. Check it out.
It is, definitely.
All right, our final segment is called Beyond the Flick. We've already talked about Gene Hackman and Al Pacino. Do you have a favorite film of either one of those guys? Like just off the top of your head, is it The Godfather? Is it kind of the obvious choices? Like, what do you love with those two?
With Pacino, it is Dog Day Afternoon.
Dog Day Afternoon. Oh,
which is definitely up there in like his most notable ones. It's not Godfather
Attica.
But I really like Dog Day Afternoon. I'm also a sucker for a good heist, like hostage type of movie, and that one really just kind of like set a lot of precedence with how it achieved that. Also, like kind of like the one location type of movie too.
Yeah.
So I really like. I would say that's my favorite of his.
Yeah, Al Pacino. I mean, for me, it's Godfather 1 and 2 and Dog Day Afternoon. Trying to think, is there a movie he made after the 70s that I love? I mean, obviously, The Irishman was great, and I thought he was great in it from Scorsese. And I'm trying to think of the last, outside of The Irishman, I feel like it's been a while since the last really great Al Pacino movie. Obviously, there's Scarface in the 80s. He's great in that. And Carlito's Way, also by De Palma, 10 years later, is really good. But for me, my favorites of both of those actors do come from the 70s. With Pacino, it's Godfather 1 and 2 and Dog Day Afternoon. And with Gene Hackman, it's definitely his Oscar-winning role in The French Connection.
Yeah.
And the conversation is an amazing film, also by Coppola.
Yeah, I'm not quite as high on
On conversation,
conversation as most, although I do really enjoy his performance. That is one of the things I really
yeah,
do enjoy
that's
about that
his
film.
performance is really fantastic.
I'd say The French Connection would take it for me as far
Yeah,
as Hackman acting, though.
yeah, and then later, The Birdcage is a childhood
Yeah,
favorite.
I love The Birdcage. That's a great movie.
Yeah, when he finally realizes that Nathan Lane is not a woman and he can't quite process. Like,
More
wait,
people
what?
need to talk about The Birdcage.
The Birdcage is a classic, a modern comedy classic. Um, but Jerry Schatzberg is our topic today. I just wanted to mention him at the end here as a director of great talent and worth. He directed many films throughout the 70s, 80s, and to the 90s. His first movie from 1970 is a Puzzle of a Downfall Child, starring Faye Dunaway. This is kind of like the phase of Dunaway's career where she could do no wrong. That's a really interesting drama I watched right before I started the podcast. It's a really good film. And he made in 79 The Seduction of Joe Tynan, one of Meryl Streep's very first movies, with Alan Alda. That's a really terrific kind of underrated gem. And the last film he made I adore is called Street Smart from 87 with Christopher Reeve and Morgan Freeman. I believe that's Morgan Freeman's first Oscar nomination, and he is spectacular in that. Really great kind of crime drama. And then my favorite film I've seen of his, there's still like 5 or 6 he directed I haven't seen, is the one we already talked about 2 years ago with Al Pacino, and that's The Panic in Needle Park. That's all. It's very kind of similar to Scarecrow in some ways. It's kind of about two drifters, this guy and this girl, who have a connection together, and they're kind of aimless, but they get into drugs and they get into the wrong scene, and it's just a great character study. I think it's a little bit more successful than Scarecrow. It's a little bit more immersive. It's a great sense of place in New York City, whereas Scarecrow is kind of all over the place with locations. Like Panic Needle Park shows New York City in 1971 in a way I think is gorgeous. And it was Al Pacino's like first major role in a movie, and it does not feel like it's his first role. Like he feels very much at home, and it's a great performance. So if you haven't seen Seduction of Joan Tynan, you can kind of take or leave. I would definitely check out Street Smart from 87 and The Panic in Needle Park from 71. Those are two really terrific dramas that you should check out. The other ones I don't know anything about. He has like 5 others on here. Honeysuckle Rose from 1980, I've heard of. I think that's supposed to be pretty decent. After Street Smart, he makes, let's see, his last film credit on IMDb is from the year 2000. It's called The Day the Ponies Come Back, and it's actually in his top 4 most known for on IMDb, which surprises me because I was seeing lots of movies in the year 2000. I don't remember that. I don't know about you, but there's not one major name in the cast, but apparently IMDb thinks it's one of his top 4 most known for titles. So there you go.
Maybe some recency bias on that one.
So Jerry Schatzberg, I feel like, it's funny. 2 of his first 3 movies are with Al Pacino, and then Al Pacino becomes this huge star over the course of the decade. You'd think in the 80s or 90s they would have reconnected for something, right?
Right.
I mean, Al Pacino owes a lot to Jerry Schatzberg for discovering him, putting him into Panic in Needle Park. He gets The Godfather, and then he's off and running after Scarecrow. You'd think that Jerry Schatzberg would have said, I'm going to write a script for Pacino in the 80s and the 90s. The fact that that never happened kind of surprises me. Al Pacino, you get him in your movie, you get a green light, right? So you think that at some point there, they would have had a connection there. He could have said, let's get Pacino for one more. But it didn't happen. I wonder why. I would love to know, like, why they didn't reconnect after Scarecrow. Maybe their working relationship, maybe it kind of floundered on Scarecrow. Maybe they didn't walk away like the best of partners after that experience. Maybe. I don't know. But good director. It's got some good titles on there. Definitely check out not only Scarecrow, which we talked about today, but Street Smart and The Panic in Needle Park. All right, that takes us to the end here, Danny. Would love for you to talk about anything you'd like to promote. Tell our listeners where they can find you online. Now is the time.
Absolutely. So you can find me at DTJ Cinema on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and at Danny Jarabek on Letterboxd, where you can hear all my thoughts on all things movies. You can also hear me and listen to our show, The Rolling Tape. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts, anywhere. You can also find us at The Rolling Tape on all social media platforms. So if you find The Rolling Tape, you'll probably find me somewhere. So yeah, listen to our show and hear more of my thoughts if you're interested.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for doing this for me, Danny. This was a lot of fun. We're a fantastic guest, great insight into our movie today. I'd love to have you back at some point. If there's any other titles from 73 that interest you, definitely let me know.
I would be happy to come back and talk about another 50-year-old movie and write a new sequel script.
Write a new sequel script.
I think that's our thing now, is that every one we do, we got to figure out what the sequel is.
What would the 50-year later sequel be about? That's always the question here at Film at 50. Yeah, so thanks for being here, Danny. Thanks to all of you for listening. You can find us online at filmat50.com. We're on Instagram and Twitter. And check out my YouTube channel, Brian Rowe Video, for all things Oscars. Until next time, remember, 50 never looked this good.